Danny Hall had not planned on attending an alien wedding. He had not planned on being anywhere near the Vora system at all, but life had a funny way of punishing people who punched their commanding officers in the face during a bar fight on Titan Station, and so here he was, captain of the Earth Coalition frigate Star Warrant, flying a diplomatic cargo run to the edge of known space, while every other pilot his age was getting real assignments. He sat in the cockpit with his boots up on the console, staring at the swirling blue-white marble of Vora through the viewport. It was a beautiful planet, the kind of place that looked peaceful from orbit, but probably had 1,000 ways to kill you on the ground. Danny said, a voice behind him. He turned. Lieutenant Nora Voss stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and a look on her face that said she had already read the briefing. He had ignored what he said. We have a problem. We always have a problem. This one's a big problem. Nora walked over and pulled up a holographic display. It showed the capital city of Vora, a massive structure of black stone and silver light crawling with thousands of alien signatures. The Cathari are in the middle of something called the Rite of Jalene. It's a sacred event, a royal wedding tournament. Danny blinked. What? Princess Aelith, the eldest daughter of King Torvon, is to be married, but she doesn't just pick a husband. The husband has to survive a series of combat trials. Warriors from all over the sector have come to compete. Nora looked at him with very serious eyes. We are not supposed to be here during this. It's a restricted cultural event. Danny scratched the back of his neck. So we leave. We can't. The fuel cells need recalibration, and the nearest station is 9 days out. We have to dock on Valora for at least 48 hours. Danny sighed. Fine, we dock, we stay quiet, we don't touch anything. Nora stared at him for a long time. Promise me. I promise. He did not keep that promise. The opening feast of the Rite of Jalene was held in the great hall of the royal palace. It was a room so large that clouds formed near the ceiling. Thousands of Cathari filled the stone benches, tall silver-skinned beings with forearms, sharp features, and glowing violet eyes. They moved with a grace that made Danny feel like a clumsy child. Among them sat warriors from a dozen other species, massive Gorvathi, berserkers with tusks the size of Danny and LT Unk and GT Y's forearm, sleek Shirin, princes in golden armor and hulking Drazic mercenaries covered in scars and bad attitudes. Danny was supposed to stay on the ship, but Dr. Sam Oakley, the ship's medic, had mentioned that the feast was open to all visitors as a sign of Cathari hospitality, and Danny had never been good at sitting still. He wore his Earth Coalition dress uniform, plain gray, with a single row of service ribbons, and stood near the back wall trying to look like he belonged. He did not look like he belonged. He was 5'10" in a room full of beings that averaged 7 FT. He was the only human on the entire planet. The food was strange, the music was stranger, but the atmosphere was electric, a buzzing energy of anticipation and aggression that Danny recognized from every fight night he had ever attended. These warriors were here to prove themselves. The air smelled like sweat and iron and something sweet he could not name. He was watching a group of Gorvathi arm wrestle when it happened. A Drazic mercenary, 8 feet tall, gray-green skin, breath-like rotting meat, stumbled into Danny from behind. Danny spilled his drink. Drazic looked down at him, and its lips pulled back to show rows of black teeth. A human, the Drazik said loud enough. For the nearby crowd to hear, I did not. No, they allowed pets at the feast. Danny said nothing. He set down his cup and took a slow breath. Your species is weak, the Drazik continued clearly. Enjoying the attention, soft skin, brittle bones, no claws, no fangs. You are prey animals pretending to be people. A few of the nearby warriors laughed. Danny felt his jaw tighten. Walk away, he told himself. Nora will kill you. Walk away. The Drazik shoved him hard. Danny stumbled backward and his boats crossed the silver line painted on the stone floor. He didn't know what the line meant. He didn't know it was the edge of the ceremonial ring, but every Cathari in the hall knew. The laughter stopped. The music stopped. Every pair of glowing violet eyes turned toward Danny. The Drazik grinned and stepped into the ring after him. Let me show everyone what humans are made of. It charged. Danny did not think. His body moved the way it always moved when something big and angry came at him. He stepped to the side, caught the Drazik's wrist, and used its own momentum to drive it face first into the stone floor. Before the creature could rise, Danny locked its arm behind its back, pressed his knee into its spine, and twisted until he heard a wet pop. The Drazik screamed. Danny let go and stepped back, breathing hard. 6 seconds. The whole thing had taken 6 seconds. 1,000 aliens stared at the small human standing over the groaning body of a Drazik mercenary twice his size. Then a voice boomed from the far end of the hall. It belonged to the Cathari high priest, an ancient figure draped in black robes with a staff that glowed like a dying star. The human has entered the ring. The human has drawn blood. By the sacred law of the right of Zaline, the human is now a contestant. Danny and LT Unk and GTY's stomach dropped. Wait, what? There is no withdrawal, the high priest continued. He must fight in the trials, or he must die for the dishonor of fleeing. The hall erupted in noise, shouting, laughing, arguing. Danny stood in the middle of it, blood on his knuckles, his heart hammering in his chest. He looked up at the royal balcony. King Torvand the Undying sat on a throne of black iron, watching him with ancient, unreadable eyes. Beside him sat a figure Danny had not noticed before, tall, silver-skinned, with 4 graceful arms and violet eyes that burned brighter than anyone else's. In the room, Princess Alith, she was looking straight at him. Danny turned and found Nora standing at the edge of the crowd. She had her hands over her face. Nora, he said, don't talk to me. I didn't mean to. You promised. Danny. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked back at the ring, at the groaning Drazik, at the high priest, at the princess, at the 1,000 warriors who now saw him as either a joke or a dead man walking. I know, somewhere in the back of the hall, a Gorvathi warrior laughed and shouted, 10 credits as the human dies. In the first round, Danny Hall, captain of the Starward Bound accidental contestant in an alien wedding tournament, took a deep breath and thought about how he was going to explain this to Earth High Command. He could not think of a single good way. The warrior barracks smelled like iron and animal sweat. Danny stood in the doorway of his assigned chamber, a stone room with a hard bed, a basin of cold water, and a window that overlooked the fighting pits below. The room was built for someone 7 ft tall. The bed was 2 long. The basin was at chest height. Everything in this place reminded him that he did not belong here. 31 other contestants had been given rooms in the barracks. Danny had seen them during the registration ceremony that morning. Each one was a mountain of muscle, armor, and teeth, the smallest of them a Velarin prince with sharp golden eyes was still a full head taller than Danny and moved like a blade through water. The largest was a Gorvathi berserker named Drew, who had arms thicker than Danny and LT, Unk and GT Wise, entire body and a voice like grinding stone. None of them looked at Danny with respect. Most looked at him the way person looks at a bug that has somehow crawled onto the dinner table with amusement and mild disgust. Danny sat on the edge of his bed and opened a small medical kit Nora had smuggled to him from the ship. Inside were painkillers, wound sealant, stem patches, and a comm device tuned to the starward bound's frequency. He pressed the comm. Nora, I'm here. Her voice was tight. I'm monitoring your vitals from the ship. Dr. Oakley is standing by. How bad is this? There was a pause. The first trial is called the Maze of Claws. It's a shifting labyrinth filled with biomechanical predators. You enter alone. You survive until dawn. That's it. That doesn't sound so bad, Danny. The last time they held this right, 11 contestants died in the maze. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "What do we know about the predators?" That was the thing about Danny Holt. He was not the fastest, he was not the toughest, but when the situation turned bad, he did not waste time feeling sorry for himself. He asked questions, he made plans, and then he moved. Nora spent the next 3 hours feeding him every piece of data she could pull from the Cathari cultural archives. The predators in the maze were called Shrike Hounds, eyeless, six-legged machines wrapped in living tissue. They hunted by sound and vibration. They were fast, but they followed predictable patrol patterns. Their joints were vulnerable to lateral stress. Danny listened. He memorized. He stretched his bruised body and taped his ribs. At sunset, a horn sounded across the city. The Maze of Claws had begun. The 32 contestants were led to the entrance of the labyrinth, a massive pit carved into the bedrock beneath the palace, its walls shifting and grinding like the gears of a living machine. One by one, the warriors entered through separate gates. Danny was the last. The Cathari guard at his gate looked down at him and shook his head slowly, as if watching a child walk into traffic. Danny stepped inside. The maze was dark. Walls moved. He could hear the clicking of Shrikehound legs echoing from somewhere ahead, and the distant screams of a contestant who had already found one. Danny did not run. He pressed himself against the wall and listened. He counted the clicks. He timed the intervals. After 10 minutes, he understood the pattern. The hound swept each corridor in a rotating cycle, leaving gaps of roughly 90 seconds between passes. He moved through those gaps like a ghost. When he could not avoid a hound, he did not fight it head on. He jammed broken wall fragments into its leg joints, crippling its movement, and slipped past while it struggled. He found a high ledge near the center of the maze and used it as a vantage point to track the hounds below. He ripped wiring from a damaged wall panel and rigged a crude noise maker that drew 3 hounds into a deadened corridor, clearing his path to a safer section. He was not strong enough to crush the hounds like the Gorvathi did. He was not fast enough to outrun them like the Velshirin, but he was clever and he was patient, and he absolutely refused to die in a hole on a planet he had never Heard of 6 months ago. Dawn came, a horn sounded, the walls stopped moving. Of the 32 contestants who entered the maze, only 14 walked out. Danny was one of them. He was bleeding from a gash on his shoulder. His left hand was swollen, and he had not slept in 20 hours, but he was alive. The Cathari crowd watched in silence as he emerged. No one cheered, but no one laughed either. That was something. The second trial came 2 days later. It was called the Pillar of Endurance. 14 stone pillars stood in a circle over a deep pit filled with venomous creatures, long pale things with too many legs that writhed and hissed in the darkness below. Each contestant stood on a pillar no wider than a dinner plate. They could not sit, they could not kneel, they could only stand. And then the attacks began. Blasts of freezing wind, waves of searing heat, stinging rain that burned the skin, bursts of sound so loud they rattled the bones. The trial was not about fighting, it was about suffering and refusing to fall. The Gorvathi went first. Their massive bodies were hard to balance on the narrow pillars, and the cold cracked their thick skin. One by one they toppled into the pit. A Velshiran prince fell when a sonic blast shattered his concentration. A Drazic mercenary simply passed out from the heat and dropped like a stone. Danny stood on his pillar and did not move. The cold hit him, and he thought about winter mornings in Ohio, walking to school with frozen fingers, and how his mother Linda always told him that cold was just a feeling, and feelings could be ignored. The heat hit him, and he slowed his breathing the way his old drill sergeant had taught him, pulling the air deep into his belly and letting his mind go quiet. The pain hit him, and he locked his knees, tightened his core, and stared straight ahead at nothing. Hours passed. The attacks grew worse. Dai's vision blurred. His legs shook. Blood dripped from his nose, but he did not fall. When the horn sounded at last, only 8 contestants remained standing. Danny was one of them. His legs gave out the moment the trial ended, and he collapsed on the pillar, gasping, unable to move for several minutes. Back on the starward-bound, Dr. Oakley looked at Dai's medical readings and said quietly, "His cortisol levels are off the chart. His body is eating itself. He can't keep doing this." Nora said nothing. She just stared at the screen showing Danny and LT Unk and GT Y's heart rate. Fast, unsteady, but still beating. That evening, Earth High Command sent a coded message to the ship. It read, "Do not cause a diplomatic incident." Nora typed back, "Too late." She closed the channel and went back to studying the Cathari combat archives, looking for anything that might help Danny survive. What was coming next? In the barracks that night, Danny lay on his stone bed, with his eyes closed, every muscle in his body screaming. He heard footsteps outside his door, soft, graceful. 4-footed, he opened his eyes. Princess Eighth stood in his doorway. She was taller than he expected up close. Her silver skin caught the dim light like polished metal, and her forearms were folded across her chest. Her violet eyes studied him the way a scientist studies something unexpected under a microscope. "You survived," she said. Her voice was low and smooth, like water over stone. "Barely," Danny said. "The maze was designed for warriors with superior strength and speed. You have neither." "How did you survive?" Danny thought about it. "I paid attention." She tilted her head, a small movement, almost bird-like. "The pillar trial was designed to break the will. Many warriors far larger than You have fallen, how did you endure? Stubbornness mostly, he said, and my mom taught me that pain is just a feeling. Eighth was quiet for a long moment, then she said, you're very small, are all humans this fragile? Danny looked up at her, and despite every aching bone in his body, he grinned. Only the dangerous ones. Something shifted in her expression. It was not a smile, not quite, but the coldness in her eyes thawed just a fraction, and she turned and left without another word. Danny lay back down and stared at the ceiling. I'm going to die here, he whispered to himself. Then he closed his eyes and slept, because tomorrow was going to be worse. The Grand Arena was the heart of the Cathari capital. It was a coliseum, carved from black volcanic stone rising in tiers that could seat 200,000 spectators. Every seat was filled. Air vibrated with the sound of drums and the low chanting of the Cathari warrior hymn, a sound so deep Danny could feel it in his chest like a second heartbeat. 8 warriors remained. The third trial was single combat, a bracketed fighting tournament, 4 fights, 4 winners. Then the semifinals, then the final. Simple and brutal. Danny stood in the preparation chamber beneath the arena floor, wrapping his hands with cloth strips. His knuckles were already bruised from the maze, his ribs ocked from the pillar trial. Dr. Oakley had patched him up as best he could through Nora's smuggled medical kit, but there was only so much medicine could do when the patient kept getting hit by things 10 times his size. Nora's voice crackled through his earpiece. Your first opponent is Drew, the Gorvathi Berserker. Danny closed his eyes. The big one. They're all big, Danny. Drew is the biggest, 7ft4 360 lb. He fights with his fists, and he has never lost a match by any record we can find. Weaknesses. He's slow when he overcommits to a swing. His knee joints are structured differently from humans. Lateral pressure could hyperextend them, and his neck is thick, but the nerve cluster at the base of his skull is exposed when he leans forward. Danny nodded. He opened his eyes and looked at his hands. They were the hands of a mechanic's son from Ohio, calloused, scarred, and not particularly large. He made 2 fists and felt the bones shift under his skin. Okay, he said, let's go. The arena gate opened and sunlight hit him like a wall. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Danny walked onto the sand and looked up at the tiers of silver-skinned faces staring down at him. He had never felt so small in his life. Across the arena, Duck emerged from the opposite gate. The Gorvathi was enormous, a wall of gray-green muscle with tusks that curled past his jaw and fists like concrete blocks. He saw Danny and let out a booming laugh that echoed off the stone walls. The little human, Drew said, cracking his knuckles. I will try to make this quick. The horn sounded. Duck charged. The ground shook under his feet. Danny could feel the vibration through his boots like a train coming straight at him. Danny did not meet the charge. He sidestepped at the last second, letting Duck's massive fist cut the air where his head had been. The Gorvathi stumbled past, confused. Danny was already behind him. He drove a low kick into the back of Drew's left knee. Hard, precise, targeting the lateral joint Nora had identified. Drew's leg buckled. He dropped to one knee with a grunt of surprise. Danny did not hesitate. He jumped onto Drew's back, wrapped his arm around the berserker's thick neck, and drove his elbow into the nerve cluster at the base of the skull. Drew howled and thrashed, reaching back with both massive hands to grab Danny. But Danny held on like a man riding a bull in a storm, shifting his weight, squeezing tighter, pressing harder on. The nerve point, Drew's movement slowed. His arms dropped, he swayed and then crashed face first into the sand. Danny let go and rolled clear, breathing hard. Drew lay still, unconscious. The arena was silent for 3 full seconds, then a sound rose from the crowd, not cheering, not yet, but a low murmur of disbelief that rippled through 200,000 spectators like wind through tall grass. The horns sounded. Danny had won. He walked back to the preparation chamber. On shaking legs, his arms were trembling from the effort of holding on to a creature that outweighed him by 200 lb. But he was alive and Drew was not. The other quarterfinal matches were fast and violent. The remaining field narrowed to 4. Danny, a Cathari commander named Valor, a Veloran prince named Scythic, and a scarred alien from a species Danny did not recognize. That evening, Princess Aleph found him. Again, Danny was sitting on a low wall outside the barracks, watching the alien sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. His ribs were wrapped tight, and he was eating something that tasted like bread but looked like a sponge. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. That soft 4-footed rhythm that was already becoming familiar. She stood beside him, looking out at the sunset. She did not sit. Cathari royalty did not sit beside commoners, and Danny was as common as they came. No off-worlder has ever reached the semifinals, she said. First time for everything, Danny replied. Why do you keep fighting? She turned her violent eyes on him. You could petition my father for an honorable withdrawal on medical grounds. Your injuries are severe enough. No one would call you a coward. You have already proven more than anyone expected. Danny chewed his strange bread and thought about it. Really thought about it, because where I come from, he said, we don't quit just because something is hard. He paused. And honestly, I'm starting to enjoy this. Aleph looked at him for a long time. He could not read her expression. The Cathari face was built differently. The emotions were there, but they lived in the eyes and the way the forearms moved, not in the mouth or brow. You are a strange creature, Danny Holt, she said. I get that a lot, Danny replied. She turned and walked away, but just before she disappeared around the corner, Danny saw something he had not seen before. The faintest shift in her posture, a softening of the shoulders, a looseness in her upper arms. He did not know what it meant in Cathari body language, but it felt warm. The semi-final came the next morning. Danny and LT Unk and GT Y's opponent was Commander Valor. Valor was everything the Cathari admired: tall, powerful, disciplined, and utterly devoted to the crown. He was King Torvund's personal champion, the warrior the king had chosen to win the right and marry his daughter. He fought with 4 swords, 1 in each hand, and he moved with a speed that seemed impossible for his size. Danny knew this would be the hardest fight of his life. The horn sounded. Valor attacked. Immediately, a whirlwind of silver blades that carved the air in overlapping arcs. Danny dodged the first strike, ducked the second, and caught the third across his ribs. Pain exploded through his side. Blood soaked his shirt. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. Nara's voice was in his ear, rapid and urgent. His upper left arm overextends on the downward strike. His lower right drops guard when he thrusts. With the upper right, use the gap. Danny watched the pattern. Dodge, duck. Step watch, the swords came again, and each time Dany moved just enough to survive, a hair's width from death over and over. Then he saw it. Gap Nora described, Valor thrust with his upper right sword and his lower right arm dipped. Dany lunged inside the reach, caught the lower right wrist, and twisted. The sword clattered to the ground before Valor could adjust. Dany grabbed the upper left wrist and yanked it across the commander's body, tangling his arms. Valgor snarled and tried to pull free, but Dany was already behind him. He locked his arms around Valgor's neck, a rear naked choke modified for the Cathari anatomy, targeting the blood vessels on either side of the throat. Valgor thrashed, his remaining two swords swung wildly, cutting Dai's arms, his shoulders, his back. Dany held on. Blood ran down his forearms and dripped onto the sand. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Valgor's movement slowed, his swords dropped from his fingers one by one, his knees hit the sand. Dany held the choke until the horn sounded and the priests declared the match over. He let go. Valgor collapsed forward, gasping but alive. Dany stood over him, swaying on his feet, covered in blood, most of it his own. The crowd did not murmur this time for the first time, a section of the arena began to chant. It was quiet at first, then louder, spreading through the tears like fire. Halt, halt, halt. Dany looked up at the royal balcony. King Torvund sat rigid on his throne, his four hands gripping the armrest, his ancient face carved from stone. He was not pleased, but beside him, Princess Alyth was leaning forward in her seat, her violet eyes wide and bright, and for one brief moment Dany saw her almost smile. He was in the final. He could barely stand. His body was a map of cuts and bruises and old pain layered on new pain, but he was in the final. Dany Holt limped off the arena sand, and somewhere in the roaring crowd, a Gorvathi warrior quietly tore up his betting slip. Dany had expected the final trial to be another fight. He had prepared for pain, for blood, for the raw grinding work of keeping his body moving when every nerve screamed at him to stop. He had braced himself for something physical, something he could grit his teeth through. He had not prepared for this. The trial of the soul was held in a chamber deep beneath the royal palace, in a place the Cathari called the heart of Vora. It was a round room carved from a single piece of crystal, pale blue, translucent, humming with a low vibration that Dany could feel in his bones. In the center of the room sat a stone chair, and above it floated a sphere of white light that pulsed like a living heart. The high priest explained the rules in a voice like grinding iron. The two finalists would enter the chamber one at a time. They would sit in the chair. The sphere would open their mind completely, totally, with nothing hidden. It would read their heart, their memories, their fears, their truths. Every wall they had ever built inside themselves would come down. Every lie they had ever told themselves would be stripped away, and Princess Alyth, linked to the sphere through a psychic bond, would feel all of it. The trial was not about strength. It was not about endurance. It was about the one thing that could not be trained or faked: the truth of who you were when everything else was taken away. Dai's opponent, the final, was Prince Scythek of the Velarin. Scythek was tall and lean, with golden skin and eyes like polished amber. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never doubted himself a day in his life. He had fought through the tournament with cold precision, never wasting energy, never showing emotion, never taking a wound he did not need to take. He was a diplomat, a warrior, and the son of a powerful alien house. His marriage to Aleth would unite two empires. King Torvund wanted Scythic to win. Everyone knew it. The priests knew it. The court knew it. Scythic knew it. And Dany knew it too. Siffic entered the chamber first. Dany waited outside, sitting on a stone bench with his elbows on his knees, staring at a floor. Nara's voice was in his ear, but for once she had nothing useful to say. There was no strategy for this, no data to study, no weakness to exploit. The chamber would see everything, and either it would be enough or it would not. Dany, Nora said quietly, whatever happens in there, you've already done something nobody thought was possible. He nodded but did not answer. After 20 minutes, Scythic emerged from the chamber. His face was calm, his posture was straight. The priests studied their instruments and nodded in approval. Siffic's reading showed ambition, discipline, strategic thinking, and unwavering devotion to duty. These were the qualities the Cathari valued above all others. He was by every measure they understood a worthy match. Then it was Dany and LT Unk and GT Y's turn. He stood up. His legs were stiff and his bandaged ribs pulled. With every breath, he walked into the chamber and sat down in the stone chair. The crystal walls hummed around him. White sphere descended until it hovered just above his head, and then the light expanded and everything else disappeared. Dany was not in the chamber anymore. He was standing in his mother's kitchen in Ohio. He was 8 years old. Linoleum floor was cracked and the winter light came through the window in pale yellow bars. His mother, Linda, was at the stove making soup from almost nothing because money was tight again. She turned and looked at him, and her face was exactly the way he remembered. Tired, kind, and stubborn in a way that no amount of hardship could break. Stand up for people, Dany. Especially the ones who can't stand up for themselves. The memory shifted. He was 19 in basic training, carrying fellow recruit named Pete Calloway on his back through a mud course because Pete had twisted his ankle, and the drill sergeant said to leave him behind. Dany did not leave him behind. He carried Pete 2 miles in the rain and collapsed at the finish line, and when the sergeant screamed at him for being slow, Dany looked up from the mud and said, "He's my teammate." Another shift. He was 26, flying a combat mission over the moons of Callisto. His wingman ship was hit and spinning toward the surface. Command ordered Dany to break off and complete the mission. Dany turned his ship around, matched the spin of the damaged craft, and guided it to a crash landing that both pilots walked away from. He was demoted for disobeying orders. He did not care. The memories came faster. Now, every fight he had ever been in, every time he had stepped between someone weaker and something stronger, every scar, every failure, every bruised knuckle and broken bone, the time he sat with a dying soldier on a battlefield and held his hand because no one should die alone, the time he adopted a stray dog on a mining colony because it was starving and scared, and it reminded him of himself. And under all of it, under the stubbornness and the recklessness and the refusal to stay down, the chamber found the thing that held it all together. It was not courage, though. Dany had that. It was not toughness, though he had that too. It was compassion, a deep, unshakable bone. level need to protect the people around him, not for glory, not for reward, not because someone told him to, but because he could not stand to watch someone suffer when he had 2 hands and 2 legs and the ability to do something about it. The chamber had seen 1,000 warriors over 1,000 years. It had seen ambition and honor and rage and discipline and every shade of strength the galaxy had to offer, but it had never seen this strange, irrational, completely human instinct to care about someone you had only just met, to throw yourself into danger for a stranger, not because it made sense, but because it was right. Princess Aleph, linked to the chamber through the psychic bond, felt all of it. She felt the warmth of Linda's kitchen. She felt the weight of Pete Calloway on Danny and LT Unk and GT Wise back. She felt the terror and determination of the rescue over Callisto. She felt the hand of the dying soldier and the wet nose of the stray dog and the quiet, fierce voice in Danny and LT Unk and GT Wise heart that said over and over and over, "I will not leave you behind." For the first time in the history of the rite of Jolene, the princess began to cry. Danny came out of the vision gasping as if he had been underwater for a long time. His face was wet with tears he did not remember shedding. His hands were shaking. He felt raw, cracked open like an egg. Every private thing inside him laid bare for strangers to see. He stood up from the chair on unsteady legs and walked out of the chamber. The priests were not nodding this time. They were arguing. Their instruments showed readings they had never seen before, patterns that did not fit any category. In their ancient records, Siphex readings had been clean, ordered, and exactly what the rite demanded. Danny and LT Unk and GT Wise readings were messy, emotional, and completely alien. The High Priest silenced the others and turned to King Torvan. "The readings are unprecedented, Your Majesty." The chamber found no ambition for power, no desire for conquest, no strategic intent. What it found was, he paused, searching for the right word in the Cathari language. An instinct to shield others, a compulsion to place himself between harm and the vulnerable. It is not a quality our records have a name for. King Torvan stared at Danny from his throne. His face was unreadable. "The decision," the High Priest said, "falls to the princess." Every eye in the room turned to Aleph. She stood beside her father's throne, her forearms at her sides, her violet eyes still shining with the tears that had not yet dried. She looked at Scythek, composed, powerful, perfect on paper. She looked at Danny, battered, bruised, bandaged, 510, standing in a room full of giants with nothing to offer but the truth of who he was. She stepped forward. "I choose the human," she said. The chamber erupted. Voices rose in shock and protest. Scythek's expression cracked for the first time. Flash of disbelief, then cold fury. Quickly hidden, King Torvan gripped the arms of his throne so hard the iron groaned under his fingers. But the law of the right was absolute. The princess had chosen. Danny stood in the middle of the chaos, his heart pounding, his mind still raw from the chamber, and he thought, not for the first time, and certainly not for the last, that he had absolutely no idea how he had ended up here. The royal court of Valera had not seen this much chaos since the last civil war, and that had been 400 years ago. Advisors shouted at priests, priests shouted at generals, generals shouted at each other. The Velsharan delegation sent a formal protest within the hour. calling the result an insult to their prince and a violation of diplomatic norms. Scythic himself said nothing. He simply bowed to the princess, turned on his heel, and walked out of the palace. With a face like carved ice, Dany had a feeling he had not seen the last of that man. Through all of it, King Torvand the Undying sat on his throne and said nothing. He watched the chaos with ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and crumble, and his silence was louder than any of the shouting. Dany stood in the middle of the storm and waited. There was nothing else to do. He could not run. The right forbade it. He could not fight. There was no one left to fight. He could only stand there, bruised and bandaged and 5'10", and wait for the king of an alien civilization to decide whether to honor his own sacred law or find a creative way to have Dany thrown into a volcano. It was Aeth who broke the silence. She walked to the center of the court, her forearms folded, her chin raised, and she spoke in a voice that cut through the noise like a blade through cloth. The right is sacred, she said. It has been sacred for 1,000 years. Every warrior who enters accepts the judgment of the chamber. Every king who holds the right accepts the choice of the princess. This is our law. This is our tradition, and I have made my choice. She turned to face her father directly. In 1,000 years of the right, every champion has fought to possess me, to claim me as a prize, a political tool. Step toward power. Dany Holt is the first who would have fought to protect me. I felt it in the chamber, father. It was not ambition, it was not desire, it was the simple instinct to stand between danger and the person beside him. He did not enter this right for me. He did not even know who I was, but if I had been in danger, he would have stood in front of me without thinking. I have never felt that from any warrior before. The court was silent. Torvand looked at his daughter for a long time, then he looked at Dany, then he looked back at his daughter. Very well, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the hall. The right will be honored, the wedding will proceed, and so 3 days later, Dany Hall married Princess Aeth of the Cathari in the grandest ceremony the planet had seen in a generation. The great hall was transformed. Thousands of candles floated in the air, casting golden light across walls draped in silver cloth. Warrior hymn was replaced by a softer melody, something old and beautiful that Dany could not understand but could feel. In his chest, the entire Cathari court was present, along with diplomats from a dozen worlds, all watching the smallest groom in the history of the right walk down the central aisle. Dany wore Cathari ceremonial armor. It was black and silver, engraved with a royal crest, and it hung slightly too large on his frame because it had been forged for someone with 4 arms and an extra foot of height. The armorer had done his best to adjust it, but Dai's 2 human arms stuck out of a chess piece designed for 4, and the shoulder plates kept sliding sideways. He looked, Nora told him later, like a kid wearing his father's suit. Nora watched from the balcony with Dr. Oakley. She was crying and laughing at the same time, a messy, hiccuping sound that she tried to muffle with her sleeve and failed. I just came here to do physicals, Dr. Oakley whispered, staring at the ceremony in disbelief. Routine medical checks, that was the mission. How did we end up at a royal wedding? Nora shook her head. Because Dany Holt cannot walk into a room without starting something. The ceremony itself was ancient and complex. A series of vows, rituals, and symbolic exchanges that stretched over 2 hours. Dany did his best to follow along. Priests guided him through each step, with the patient frustration of teachers dealing with a particularly slow student. Then came the final vow. Dany was required to speak the traditional bonding words in the Cathari warrior tongue. The phrase was long, guttural, and involved sounds that the human throat was simply not designed to make. Nora had spent the previous night coaching him through it over the comm, but the Cathari language had 16 vowel sounds, and Dany and LT Uncan GT, wise Ohio accent, could barely handle 5. He stood before Alyth, took a breath, and spoke. The vow, what came out of his mouth, was so mangled, so broken, so profoundly wrong that the high priest visibly winced. The nearest Carters looked away, a child in the front row covered her ears. Dany finished the vow and looked at Aeth with the expression of a man who knew he had just butchered something sacred but was hoping that effort counted for something. Alyth looked at him. Her violet eyes were wide, her forearms were frozen at her sides, and then she laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a diplomatic laugh, a real, full, unguarded laugh that burst out of her like something that had been locked away for a very long time. It echoed through the great hall, bright and warm and completely unexpected. And every Cathari in the room stared in shock, because no one, not the priests, not the court, not the king himself, had ever heard Princess Aeth laugh like that. Dany grinned. He could not help it. The laugh was contagious, and despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the absurdity of his entire situation, he started laughing too. And for one strange, perfect moment, the most powerful alien civilization in the sector watched a human and a princess stand at the altar and laugh together, like two people who had just discovered something wonderful and unexpected about each other. The ceremony was completed. The bond was sealed. Dany Holt, captain of the Starward Bound, son of a mechanic from Ohio, became the prince consort of the Cathari Empire. That evening, after the feast and the music and the endless parade of alien dignitaries offering congratulations that ranged from genuine to deeply suspicious, King Torvon pulled Dany aside. They stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The night sky of Vale Yara was filled with 3 moons and a ribbon of stars so dense it looked like spilled milk. Torvon was silent for a long time, his forearms resting on the stone railing, his ancient face lit by moonlight. I have fought wars for 600 years, Torvon said at last. His voice was different now, quieter, stripped of the royal authority, closer to something human. I have buried sons and daughters and warriors beyond counting. I have seen every kind of strength the galaxy has to offer. He turned and looked at Dany. I never once saw the thing the chamber found in you, that instinct to care about someone you have only just met, to bleed for a stranger, to throw yourself into danger, not for power or glory, but because something inside you simply will not allow you to stand by. He paused. I do not understand it. I'm not sure I do either, Dany said. Honestly, but I respect it, Torvon said. It is not a Cathari quality. It may not even be a sane quality, but it is real, and my daughter saw it, and for the first time in her life she chose something for herself instead of something for the Empire. Dany nodded slowly. He did not know what to say to that. Torvon leaned closer. His violet eyes burned in the dark, and his voice dropped to a low rumble that vibrated in Danny and LT Unk and GT, wise ribs. But here, me human, if you ever make my daughter cry, I will destroy your entire solar system. Danny swallowed. Yes, sir. Torvund held his gaze for 5 long seconds, then the corner of his mouth twitched just barely, just for a moment, and he turned and walked back. Inside, Danny stood alone on the balcony, breathing the alien air, looking up at 3 moons and wondering how a bar fight on Titan Station had led to this exact moment. Later that night he sat in the comm room of the Starward Bound and typed a message to Earth High Command: diplomatic mission complete. Trade negotiations successful. Cultural exchange program initiated. Also, I got married. Please update my personnel file. Captain Danny Hall, Prince Consort of the Cathari Empire, son-in-law to King Torvund the Undying. He paused, then added, P.S. Nora says hi. He sent the message and leaned back in his chair. The reply came 14 hours later. It was short. What? Danny read it, smiled, and closed the channel. In the barracks below the palace, the betting boards had been updated for the last time. The final odds sheet showed one entry at the very bottom, added after the ceremony by an anonymous Gorvathi warrior who had lost 10 credits on the first round and had been quietly cheering ever since. It read, Danny Hall human, odds of surviving the right 20,000 to 1, odds of becoming king's son-in-law incalculable, result paid in full, and somewhere on a balcony overlooking the sleeping city of Viora, Princess Alith stood in the moonlight and smiled. A real smile, unhidden and unguarded, and thought about the strange, stubborn, impossibly small human who had stumbled into her life and changed everything.